The very first time my wife invited me out to a company function, things felt off. The exact second I stepped inside that restaurant, she gave me this look, like I was some kind of party crasher who didn't belong in her world. Standing right next to her was this guy from her department. He had to be at least 10 years younger than her, and honestly, he acted way too relaxed for someone who was supposed to be her subordinate. But, Dana was the one who actually asked me to come along that night. About a week before that, while we were sitting down having dinner, she told me I was finally going to meet the people she spent her whole week with. I have to admit, I really liked the sound of that. Up until then, I'd barely had any contact with her professional life. Anyway, flash forward to the night of the party, and she was opening the door for me. I'd actually shown up a little bit early, so I spotted her across the crowded room and raised my hand to wave. She caught my eye, but right then, she hit me with that look again, just pure judgment, like I was totally out of place. And there was that guy right by her side, a young kid, probably around 35. He was standing incredibly close to her, looking totally relaxed and at ease, like that spot right next to her belonged to him by right. Dana hurried me over there real quick, way too fast, if you ask me, and introduced him, saying, "This is Adam Price, my lead specialist." The guy shook my hand, held my gaze for a second longer than he really needed to, and then just turned away. The rest of the evening, she treated me like I was nothing but an inconvenience. A couple of times, she actually walked away with Adam to talk about their quarterly numbers. I just stood there by the window, holding my drink and literally counting down the minutes until I could leave. Later on, when we were in the truck driving back home, I tried to make small talk and mentioned that it had been a nice evening. She completely snapped at me, tearing into me over how I'd parked the car at the house. Out of all things, she picked a fight over parking. And that was the very first moment I caught myself thinking, that is not how a tired person reacts. That is exactly how someone acts when they're hiding a secret. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who goes around making scenes. For 22 years, I truly believed we had a completely normal marriage. It wasn't perfect, sure, but it was honest. So right then, I made up my mind to just observe. I wasn't going to follow her around or do anything crazy, but I was going to pay a little closer attention than I usually did. A couple of days later, an opportunity practically dropped into my lap. Dana rushed out the door that morning in a total hurry and accidentally left a folder behind on the counter. It was a blue folder filled with papers for some major meeting. She called me from her car, sounding completely frantic about it, so I told her I'd drive it over to her office. When I got to her building, the lady at the front desk told me Dana was stuck in a meeting and asked me to wait in this glass-walled conference room. I sat down, rested the folder on my knee, and just watched the hallway. About 10 minutes into sitting there, that exact same guy, Adam Price, walked right past the glass. He didn't even notice me. He had his phone pressed to his ear and his eyes glued to the floor. As he walked by, I heard him say to whoever was on the line, with this lazy little smirk on his face, "If she signs off on my bonus, I'm basically a saint." He kept on walking down the hall, and I stayed right where I was, holding that folder. A minute later, Dana came around the corner. She spotted me through the glass and stopped dead in her tracks right in the middle of the hallway. She didn't come straight toward me either, and when she finally did walk into the room, her first words weren't, "Is everything okay?" or "Why are you here?" Instead, she looked at me and asked, "How long have you been sitting there?" I just handed her the paperwork, made some comment about the traffic on the way over, and walked out. But man, that question, "How long have you been sitting there?" it just kept looping in my mind for the rest of the day. On the surface, it's a pretty standard question, but for some reason, it chilled me to the bone. For the next few days, I didn't do a thing. I kept telling myself that I was just imagining things and making a big deal out of nothing. I blamed it on her stressful job, the long hours, and the heavy pressure she always brought home with her. I came up with 1,000 different explanations, and honestly, I wanted nothing more than to believe every single one of them. Then came Saturday morning. I was standing in the kitchen making coffee while Dana was upstairs taking a shower. Her phone was sitting face up on the kitchen table. I wasn't even planning on touching it, but it suddenly buzzed once and the screen lit up all on its own. The preview showed the entire message without me even having to unlock the device. It said, "Thanks for last night, boss. The Hartley court was great. Waiting on the bonus confirmation." I just stood there frozen, holding the kettle in my hand, reading those 2 lines over and over again. Last night, the Hartley court. Boss, what would you do if you were standing in my shoes in that kitchen? Leave a comment with your thoughts on how you'd handle it. Anyway, I didn't even hear her coming down the stairs. Suddenly, Dana flew into the kitchen with wet hair, wearing her robe, and snatched the phone right out of my hand. Her face went completely pale. She wasn't angry, and she didn't look insulted. She looked terrified, exactly like someone who had just been caught red-handed. She started talking incredibly fast, claiming it was just a stupid joke and that everyone in her department teased each other like that. Boss, hotel. She insisted it was just some inside office meme, talking way too fast and way too much. I just nodded my head and kept quiet. But in that exact moment, every single strange detail clicked together into one clear picture. Her behavior at the party, that defensive question at her office, that young guy and his bonus. I couldn't brush it off as a coincidence anymore, and I knew right then I had to see the truth with my own eyes. I couldn't shake the name from that text message. The Hartley court. It just stuck in my head. 2 simple words burned into my brain from a phone screen. All through the next week, those words kept popping into my head during the most random, ordinary moments, while I was driving, while I was eating dinner, and late at night. Then on Thursday, Dana mentioned she'd be coming home late. She told me it was an end-of-the-month meeting that might run until 9 o'clock. She said it so calmly, like it was just part of her usual routine, and she even kissed me on the cheek before heading out the door. But I didn't stay at home. I got into my truck, drove over to the Hartley court, and parked right across from the main entrance, angling the vehicle so I had a clear view of the glass doors. I sat there feeling like an absolute idiot. A 49-year-old man sitting in a pickup truck, staking out his own wife. A few times, I actually reached for the keys to start the engine and just drive back home. Then, at 7:45, the front doors opened. They walked out together. It was Dana and Adam Price. As they walked, he casually draped his jacket over her shoulders, the kind of intimate gesture you absolutely do not do for a regular coworker. Then he placed his hand firmly on her waist, and she leaned up on her tiptoes and kissed him. It wasn't a quick peck, either, and it certainly wasn't the way you kiss someone for the very first time. I didn't get out of my truck, and I didn't even honk the horn. I just sat there watching everything unfold through the windshield. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles turned completely white. Every single thing I had spent the past week blaming on work stress, long hours, and my own paranoia. There it was, standing right in front of a hotel entrance, kissing. There was no more room for maybe. I started up my truck and drove away, making sure to stay ahead of them on the road. But I didn't head straight back to the house. Instead, I just sat there in the truck for a real long time, parked in that exact same lot after they had already gone. I just sat. I wasn't sitting there sketching out plans or practicing what I was going to say to her. My mind was completely blank and quiet. It felt exactly like that moment when a tooth has been throbbing for days and then, all of a sudden, the ache just stops. By the time I finally pulled into the driveway, I was home before Dana. I crawled into bed and feigned sleep, listening as she walked through the door, rustled around in the kitchen, and brushed her teeth. I didn't bother getting up to drag her into some midnight interrogation. Interrogations are for men who are still holding out hope for a different answer, and I was completely done hoping for that. The next morning, right after she headed out, I got in my truck and drove out after her, straight to her office building. I took the elevator up to her floor because I just wanted to have a quiet conversation, man-to-man, without an audience. The woman at the front desk told me Dana was caught up in their morning huddle, so I stepped into her private office to wait for her. And right there on her desk, sitting right on top of a stack of paperwork, was a memo. It was a transfer request for Adam Price, moving him out to the company's New York office. It included a big promotion and a new salary that was pretty much double what he was pulling in right now. I just stood there, staring down at that sheet of paper. Everything was printed in neat little type, and her signature was already inked right at the bottom. Something deep inside me just wouldn't let that tidy little piece of corporate business slide through. I reached over, grabbed the pen right off her desk, and wrote one single line across the entire page in big, bold letters. Transfer denied. Personal relationship between staff. The husband. I set the pen back down and walked right out of her office. There was absolutely no taking it back now. That paper wasn't just for her eyes anymore. But I didn't leave the building right away. I ended up going down to the third floor to the office cafeteria, which was this big, bright room full of vending machines and tables. I bought a cup of coffee from the machine and took a seat. To be honest, I don't really know why I stayed. Maybe I was still looking for something, anything to hold on to. At the table right next to mine, there was a guy sitting down who looked a little bit younger than me, wearing his ID badge on a lanyard. The badge had the exact same company logo as Dana's, and it listed her department. I moved over to his table, gave him a friendly nod, and somehow we just fell into an easy conversation about nothing special, the weather, how bad the machine coffee tasted, stuff like that. After a minute, I casually mentioned that my company might be doing a joint project with theirs down the line, and I dropped the hint that I'd heard some really great things about one of their specialists, a guy named Adam Price. I just threw the name out there to see what would happen. The guy, who told me his name was Travis, just grinned and took a quick look around the room. He said, "Price? Oh, that guy is definitely going places. He figured out the absolute shortest path to the top." He took a sip of his coffee, leaned in a little closer, and said in a quieter voice, "Straight through the boss's office. The entire floor knows about it, and the guy doesn't even bother hiding it. Just last week at the bar after work, he was straight up bragging about it. He told everyone you just have to pick the right person to get close to. The bonuses, the New York transfer. He literally calls the whole thing an investment. What did this story teach you about how quickly everything can shatter?" Anyway, I finished up my coffee, thanked Travis for the chat, and headed back upstairs. The whole time I was in the elevator, one single question kept spinning around in my head. Okay, so for a kid like him, it was all just a cold calculation to get the money and the transfer. But what about her? What on earth did she think she was getting out of this? For the very first time, I actually felt a twinge of pity for her, because I had already figured Price out completely, but she, apparently, still hadn't a clue. When I walked back onto her floor and stepped into the office, Dana was already there. She had obviously seen the crossed-out memo, and she knew exactly what it meant. Her face was completely white, and she was clutching that exact piece of paper in her hand. She didn't even give me a chance to open my mouth. She went straight on the attack. She started screaming that I was spying on her, that I was completely paranoid, and that I was trying to humiliate her at her own job. She insisted that the hotel was just a normal business meeting and that I was ruining everything we had with my own two hands. I just stood there and let her finish her tirade. Then, I looked her in the eye and said, perfectly calm and level, the exact line I'd brought down from the third-floor cafeteria. "Not a bad way to land a New York transfer. Through the boss." She went dead silent. She just froze right in the middle of a breath, and whatever color was left in her face completely vanished. For a few long seconds, that office was incredibly quiet. Then she asked me, and she said it way too fast, the sheer panic giving her away completely, "Who told you about New York?" Notice she didn't say that's not true or what kind of nonsense is that. She just wanted to know who leaked it. I looked at her and said, "It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that your entire floor has known for a while now that you fell hard for a kid who is just using you. He's getting bonuses and a transfer out of you, and he's telling everyone about it himself down at the local bar." She tried to start up again, rambling about office gossip, jealous coworkers, and how I just didn't understand how corporate culture worked, but her voice was shaking uncontrollably. I didn't bother arguing with her. There was absolutely nothing left to argue about. I simply told her that I was going to be staying somewhere else for the time being, and I turned around and walked out. Walking down the hallway, not a single one of her coworkers looked up at me. They were all staring at their computer monitors incredibly hard, pretending to be busy. I ended up moving in with my brother, Gary. He's had a spare bedroom ever since his son packed up and left for college. Gary didn't push me with a ton of nosy questions. He just quietly cleared off a shelf for me in the closet and set a second plate on the dinner table every night. For about 2 weeks, Dana and I barely exchanged a word. At first, she sent me these angry text messages, claiming I had completely ruined her professional reputation and that ever since my little stunt with the memo, everyone at work was looking at her sideways. After a while, her tone flattened out and became completely businesslike. She'd text things like, "We need to figure out the utility bills," or "You forgot to take some of your paperwork." It was almost like we had broken up over standard household chores. Then, late one night, a completely different kind of text came through. It read, "Let's try to talk calmly. Not over the phone. Please." I sat there staring at that message for a really long time. Gary was already fast asleep, and the whole house was dead quiet. And I asked myself honestly, what was I actually hoping to get out of a conversation like that? Was I looking for an apology? Was I waiting for some kind of magical explanation that could somehow fix this and turn everything back around? Was there any version of this story where I could ever trust her again? I finally realized that there was no such version. And honestly, I didn't even want one anymore. Every single morning I woke up at my brother's house. I noticed that the heavy stone that used to sit on my chest was completely gone. And right there, that was all the answer I needed. When morning came, I didn't drive over to see Dana. I drove somewhere else entirely. I found myself a good divorce lawyer and told him to start drawing up the paperwork. For the first time in 2 solid months, I was finally doing something that wasn't just reacting to someone else's moves. I was doing it simply because I chose to. About a month flew by, and my lawyer called me up to tell me I needed to come down to the office to sign the final settlement. It was just a standard step in the process, and all the papers were ready. Dana had actually gotten there ahead of me, signed everywhere she was supposed to, and left early so we wouldn't have to cross paths in the corridor. The lawyer slid this thick stack of paperwork across the desk and pointed out all the spots where I needed to sign. I turned page after page, reading through nothing but dry, legal lines. The house, the truck, the bank accounts, the house again. And then, tucked right in between the standard forms, I spotted a separate sheet of paper. It was an official staffing record from her company. The lawyer mentioned that they pull those documents just to have official proof of who works where and how much they're earning. I probably would have flipped right past it too. But one specific line caught my eye. In the box that listed Dana's current job position, our hometown wasn't listed anymore. Instead, it read, Director of Regional Operations, New York Office. And the start date was listed for this coming Monday. I just sat there in that chair, staring at that date. Later on, when I got out to the parking lot and climbed into my truck, I pulled out my phone and looked up Adam Price's social media profile. Sure enough, his public profile had been updated just a few days prior. He had a brand new title, listed at the exact same New York office. So, this whole thing hadn't just been decided last week. It hadn't happened because of my stunt with the memo. This entire transfer had been in the works for a very long time. Both of their transfers, hers and his, moving out to the exact same city. What I had spent weeks thinking was just a mistake on her part, a temporary lapse in judgment or a moment of weakness, it was actually a fully formed plan. A cold, calculated plan drawn up way ahead of time for the two of them. I had just spent a very long time being completely blind to the blueprint. I signed the very last page and slid the folder back across the desk to the lawyer. He told me the house was officially settled, and it was staying with me. There was nothing left to fight over. I thanked him for his time and took the elevator ride down all by myself. When I stepped outside, it was one of those flat, overcast, gray days where the light outside barely changes from morning until night. I didn't walk straight over to my truck. I went and sat down on a bench right by the parking lot for a minute. It wasn't because I was having a hard time, but simply because I had absolutely nowhere left to hurry to. For 2 straight months, I had been running the exact same questions around in circles inside my head, turning over every single dinner we had, every late meeting, and every time she told me, "It's nothing, honey." I had been constantly searching for some version of reality where it all made sense, where it added up to something I could actually wrap my head around. But I wasn't doing that anymore. I had finally seen the entire blueprint at the very end, and there wasn't a single detail left to fill in. Suddenly, My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from Dana. The very first message I'd received from her in 9 days. It just said, "Hope it all went okay." I read those 5 words over twice. Then, I calmly set the phone face down on my knee and just watched this guy across the parking lot take 3 separate tries to back a massive semi-truck into a really tight loading gap. When he finally nailed it, I stood up from the bench. There was an old wooden fence waiting for me in the backyard at home. It was the exact fence that Dana and I had spent the last 2 years saying we were going to fix up this coming spring. I figured today was as good a day as any to go back there, clear out the overgrown brush, and finally get to work on it. I never even opened her text message. I just got back into my truck and drove on home. I took my sweet time on the road, and the silence inside the cab didn't feel heavy or pressed down on me the way I always thought it would. Adam wanted his bonuses, his big promotion, and a fast track up the corporate ladder. His motives were incredibly easy to read from a mile away. Dana, she wanted something else entirely. She just wanted to feel young, exciting, and wanted again. In the grand scheme of things, I suppose both of them got exactly what they came for. What they had wasn't love. It was just a business deal where the roles were written out well in advance. The bonuses, the joint transfer to New York for 2. But the thing about every single deal is that it always has a weak spot. When you need a person not for who they are, but strictly for what they can give you, sooner or later one of those partners is going to wake up and realize they gave away entirely too much, and got back absolutely nothing but an illusion.